Hello class. All right. Thank you for joining. So today what we're going to talk about is the project. All right. So I'm going to go through all the deliverables today. We'll start with the first one, go from there. And basically, yeah, we'll just talk about what we're going to try to accomplish with this project, some requirements and how it's going to work. All right, let's dive right in. Okay. So first of all, let's just talk about some key things about the project. First of all, you have to be creative. It's a requirement number one, right? So the idea of the project is you need to solve some sort of problem, right? And you can solve any problem. And the idea is, hey, like for example, I've had pretty interesting things in the past, and basically, even if you don't solve a problem, the idea is you have to create a website that basically does something, right? So for example, it could be like something like maybe you want to make a PC part picker, something like that, right? Pretty interesting things, right? And I'll go into what we're trying to do, but essentially we want to have an imaginary client that you help solve a problem for, right? And what we're going to do to start this is basically leverage a public API, right? And so what are APIs, right? APIs are basically ways to access data. So there's this great list here of all these public APIs, right? And so for example, right, you might want to solve like, hey, I want to create a website with a list of different animes, right? And so what you could do is use this AnyDB API and basically get that data, right? So your first position as part of this project proposal is kind of figuring out what you want to do as part of this. Now, one thing I'm going to call out, try and use, actually, you can use any API, whatever makes the most sense for you. The OAuth ones might be a little more complex, but I'm sure if you work with me, we can figure out how to use those. But in general, API keys and no's are easier, so just being real. But you can use any API from this list, or you can find another API. So for example, let's say you have a very unique thing that you want to do. For example, maybe you want to get a list of, I don't know, SSDs. Maybe there's an API for that that's not on this list. You can go ahead, find that, use that, right? And if you're having trouble like thinking of something that you want to work on, let me know and we can maybe kind of brainstorm or figure something out, right? We're happy to do that, right? Now, in terms of what we're doing for the project, right, you can have up to one partner. Okay, so it can be you and one other person. Now, that is not forced and is not mandatory. It can be you and only you, or it can be you and one partner. That is it. That's the hard limit. Your partner does not have to be in the same section. If you know someone in a different section, you're allowed to do that. So it's totally fine, right? So that's good. Now, for the project, right, as you're thinking through the proposal and everything, right, the first thing you should first think about is you have to think about what you're going to build. Now, for the project, your front end is going to be in HTML and CSS or React, and your back end has to be in JavaScript or TypeScript, right? I have had students in the past try Python or things, but this is a JavaScript class and an HTML class. We must use those. And for deployments, so as you're working through the proposal, right, you're going to use Vercel and Supabase for the database. And we actually have lectures on those later in the semester, so that's why I am recommending those. Right. So basically in your proposal, right, you're intended to basically kind of decide on what to address, decide what your application will be communicating, designing like, having a problem statement, right? What's the problem you're hoping to solve, who, etc., right? Also explaining which API you've chosen, and then also the technology decisions. So some of them I know I've already prescribed to you, and that's totally fine. But if there's anything else you think might be useful, you're free to write it down. And I want to be very clear here, right? We are very early in the semester, so if you make changes, that is totally okay, right? So you don't have to go back and update the proposal. If you write something and then you realize, hey, that's not going to work, totally fine. I'm happy to work with you and we'll figure that out, right? And also, one of the main things is creating initial wireframes. So what are wireframes? Wireframes are basically diagrams, right? They are rough mock-ups, right? You can use AI, you can hand draw them, whatever, but there has to be a visual element. There has to be a drawing or something to explain the layout of what you're looking to achieve. So all of that is good. Okay. Now, from there, what you can do is you also have a proposal, or sorry, not a proposal, an API testing, right? So your API testing, essentially, this is the second kind of a deliverable you have. And what you're going to do is use that API and you're going to test it and make sure the outputs are what you're expecting and make sure you're leveraging them, right? And you have to take screenshots of the request and response and show that you're able to get the data, right? So, and also list each of the APIs, right? So that's very crucial. And lastly, outside of that is the final deliverable, the most exciting part, right? The final deliverable here is basically you'll have a README, a developer manual, and then you will have the code. So you have to have a front end, a back end, and a deployment, right? So what's really exciting about this project is we're going to actually get you to deploy it, right? Yeah, so basically for the front end, right, we're going to be talking about how to fetch API data using CSS, using 2 JavaScript libraries, and having 3 application pages. And on the back end, you know, you're going to connect to Supabase database, use 2 endpoints that you authored, and then also, lastly, you're going to deploy the project, right? So this project, I'd say, is probably the most exciting part of the class, right? There's a lot of cool things you can do, right? So I really encourage you to have a lot of fun with this, because I think for a lot of students, this ends up being something they put on their resume, because it's also deployed, so they can actually send it to potential employers and internships in the future. So I really encourage you to try with this and just make a really good product, right? Because I think this is something that could be very valuable, and you can talk about your whole process as you're going through interviews and stuff like that. So pretty cool. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be grading each of these things personally, right? So I'll be looking at each of your projects and your outlines and everything. So I'm really excited to see them, and I'm really excited to just like see what you guys come up with. I had some really cool stuff last year. But yeah, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to work with you. And yeah, all right, thanks everyone.